Most people think INFJs are alone because they're broken or antisocial. They see the empty Friday night plans, the declined invitations, the preference for solitude, and they assume something's wrong. But here's what they're missing. INFJ isolation isn't a bug in your programming. It's a feature of your advanced psychological architecture. Your brain operates at a cognitive frequency that 98% of the population can't match. This creates what psychologists call cognitive isolation. You're not alone because you're damaged. You're alone because you're too complex for surface-level connection. Today we're exploring the strategic reasons your mind chooses solitude over shallow relationships, and why your loneliness might actually be your brain's most intelligent decision. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our weekly deep dives into the world of personality types. And if you're looking for a deeper understanding of yourself and your INFJ personality, browse our favorite INFJ products in the description, and click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test. The INFJ processing gap. Why your brain is too fast. Your dominant function, introverted intuition, processes patterns and connections at lightning speed, while others are still gathering basic information. When you walk into a room, your INI has already mapped the social dynamics, predicted the conversation flow, and identified the underlying tensions that won't surface for another hour. You're operating in what researchers call future time, while most people live in present time. This creates a fundamental mismatch with your auxiliary function, extroverted feeling. Your FE desperately wants to connect with people, but it's trying to bridge a gap to minds that are operating 3 to 4 cognitive steps behind you. It's like trying to have a chess conversation with someone who's still learning checkers. The pieces look similar, but you're playing completely different games. Think about your last social interaction where you felt frustrated or misunderstood. You probably saw the conversation's direction 5 moves ahead, anticipated the emotional undercurrents, and tried to steer toward deeper meaning. Meanwhile, the other person was focused on surface-level pleasantries, completely unaware of the complex analysis happening in your mind. Your FE registered this as a failed connection attempt. But the real issue was processing speed asymmetry. Research on cognitive processing shows that people with dominant INI functions experience what neuroscientists call compressed insight formation. Your brain consolidates multiple data points into intuitive leaps that feel obvious to you, but seem revolutionary to others. When you share these insights, people either dismiss them as overthinking or become uncomfortable with your ability to see patterns they've missed. This processing gap creates a painful choice. Engage at their level and feel intellectually starved, or maintain your cognitive pace and accept isolation. Most INFJs choose intellectual integrity over social comfort, which is actually a strategic decision, not a character flaw. The exhaustion comes from constantly translating your complex inner processing into language that others can follow. It's like being a native speaker forced to communicate in a second language all day. Technically possible, but mentally draining. Your brain calculates the energy cost of this translation work and often determines that solitude is more sustainable than chronic intellectual understimulation. Your INFJ combination was designed for deep, meaningful connections with people who can match your processing speed. When those people aren't available, your system naturally withdraws to preserve its complex operating capacity. The isolation feels lonely, but it's actually your brain protecting its most valuable asset, its ability to see what others cannot. This isn't antisocial behavior. It's cognitive self-preservation. Your mind recognizes that shallow interactions don't just fail to nourish you, they actively drain the mental resources you need for your real work in the world. The strategic choice to be alone rather than intellectually compromised is a sign of psychological sophistication, not social dysfunction. The tragedy is that most people interpret your withdrawal as rejection or superiority, when actually you're just operating at a different cognitive frequency. You're not choosing to be alone because you don't value connection. You're choosing to be alone because you value authentic connection too much to accept its shallow substitute. Understanding this processing gap changes everything about how you view your isolation. You're not broken for needing more than small talk. You're not demanding for wanting intellectual depth. You're not antisocial for preferring solitude to surface-level socializing. You're simply a complex system that requires compatible input to function optimally. The path forward isn't learning to dumb down your processing speed. It's learning to identify and connect with the rare individuals who can match your cognitive pace. Your isolation isn't a life sentence. It's a filtering system that's protecting you from wasting energy on incompatible connections while you search for the ones that will truly sustain you. The authenticity filter system, your built-in fake detector. Your tertiary tie function acts as an authenticity scanning system that never shuts off. While other people can casually overlook inconsistencies between what someone says and what they actually believe, your tie immediately flags these incongruences as threat signals. You detect when someone's words don't match their energy, when their smile doesn't reach their eyes, when their enthusiasm feels manufactured. This isn't paranoia or judgment. It's your brain's sophisticated pattern recognition system identifying data that doesn't compute. When someone tells you they're fine, but their body language screams distress, your TI processes this contradiction automatically. When a colleague claims to support your project while subtly undermining it in meetings, your authenticity detector sounds the alarm before your conscious mind even catches up. The problem is that most social interaction requires performance and filtering. People wear emotional masks not because they're malicious, but because society demands it. We're taught to say, "I'm great," when we're struggling, to smile when we're angry, to show enthusiasm for things that bore us. These social scripts keep society functioning smoothly, but your TI experiences them as system errors that need correction. You feel the exhaustion of being surrounded by people wearing emotional masks when you crave genuine connection. Small talk becomes psychological violence because your brain is simultaneously processing what's being said and what's being hidden. You're having two conversations at once, the surface dialogue and the authentic undercurrent that nobody else is acknowledging. Your authenticity filter creates a peculiar social problem. When you respond to what people are actually feeling rather than what they're saying, they think you're being invasive or presumptuous. When you address the elephant in the room that everyone else is politely ignoring, you're labeled as intense or inappropriate. Your natural inclination toward truth-telling makes others uncomfortable because it threatens their carefully constructed social facades. This constant detection of inauthenticity triggers your brain's strategic response. Withdraw from inauthentic environments to preserve mental clarity. Your TI calculates that engaging with people who aren't being genuine is not just unproductive, it's actively harmful to your psychological well-being. Every interaction with someone wearing an emotional mask requires you to suppress your natural truth-detecting abilities, which feels like self-betrayal. The isolation isn't antisocial behavior. It's intellectual self-defense. Your brain recognizes that environments filled with performance and pretense drain your cognitive resources without providing meaningful return. You'd rather have no connection than a connection built on mutual deception or emotional theater. This authenticity requirement isn't perfectionism. It's a neurological necessity. Your TI function literally cannot relax in the presence of incongruence. It's like trying to ignore a smoke alarm. Technically possible, but psychologically exhausting. When someone is being inauthentic, your brain treats it as incomplete data that needs resolution, creating a constant low-level stress response. The tragedy is that your authenticity filter, designed to protect you from shallow relationships, often prevents you from forming any relationships at all. You become so sensitive to emotional performance that you withdraw from situations where people are still learning to be genuine. You expect immediate authenticity from people who may need time and safety to remove their masks. Your strategic choice to isolate rather than engage with inauthentic people makes logical sense, but it also creates a self-perpetuating cycle. The more you withdraw from inauthentic environments, the fewer opportunities you have to find genuinely authentic people. Your protective mechanism becomes a prison that keeps out both the fake connections you want to avoid and the real connections you desperately need. The path forward requires recalibrating your authenticity filter, not abandoning it. Learning to distinguish between harmful deception and protective social filtering allows you to engage selectively rather than withdrawing completely. Your gift for detecting authenticity is valuable. It just needs strategic application rather than constant activation. The empathy energy economy. Why caring costs too much. Your fee function absorbs emotional data from everyone around you without conscious control. It's not a choice you make, it's how your nervous system is wired. When you walk into a coffee shop, you're not just ordering a drink, you're unconsciously downloading the barista's stress level, the couple's relationship tension at table 3, and the quiet desperation of the person working alone in the corner. Each person in your environment creates an energy drain through emotional osmosis that you can't simply turn off. Research shows that highly empathetic individuals experience actual physical fatigue from social exposure. Your mirror neurons fire constantly when you're around others, creating a neurological burden that most people don't carry. While others can compartmentalize emotions and focus selectively, your FE processes every emotional signal within range. It's like having a radio that picks up every frequency simultaneously. The information overload becomes overwhelming. This creates a brutal energy equation that your brain calculates automatically. Each shallow social interaction costs you emotional bandwidth without providing meaningful return. Your nervous system tracks this cost-benefit ratio like an accountant, measuring the energy expenditure against the connection quality received. When the math consistently shows a negative return on investment, your brain makes the strategic decision to withdraw. Think about your last group social event. While others seemed energized by the crowd, you probably felt progressively drained as the evening continued. You weren't being antisocial, you were experiencing empathy fatigue. Your Fae was working overtime to process multiple emotional frequencies while simultaneously trying to maintain your own emotional equilibrium. By the end of the night, you likely needed hours or days of solitude just to return to baseline. Your brain's protective response is strategic solitude, creating space to recharge and focus your empathy on people who actually matter. This isn't selfishness, it's resource management. Your empathy is a finite resource that gets depleted through overuse. Just like athletes need recovery time between intense training sessions, your empathic capacity needs downtime between social exposures. The tragedy is that most people interpret your need for emotional recovery as rejection or disinterest. They don't understand that caring too much, not too little, is what drives you to isolation. You're not avoiding people because you don't value connection. You're avoiding people because you value authentic connection so much that you can't afford to waste your limited empathic energy on surface-level interactions. Why you can't just ignore other people's emotions becomes clear when you understand that your FE function operates below conscious awareness. It's like asking someone to ignore their heartbeat. Technically impossible, because it's an automatic physiological process. Your brain registers emotional data whether you want it to or not, which means being around people always has an energetic cost. The choice between being around people and maintaining your sanity becomes obvious when you realize that your empathy operates at maximum sensitivity all the time. You can't dial it down for casual interactions the way others can. Every social encounter demands your full empathic capacity, which makes strategic isolation not just preferable, but necessary for psychological survival. Strategic solitude allows you to preserve your empathic gifts for relationships that deserve them, while protecting yourself from the chronic depletion that comes from caring about everyone you encounter. The Depth Requirement Protocol. Your standards aren't high, they're necessary. Your brain requires intellectual and emotional depth to feel sustained by relationships. This isn't a preference or a personality quirk. It's a neurological requirement built into your cognitive architecture. Surface-level friendships don't just bore you, they actively drain your cognitive resources by forcing your complex processing system to operate below its natural capacity. When you engage in shallow conversation, Your ni-dominant brain is like a supercomputer being asked to perform basic calculations. The underutilization creates a form of cognitive friction that registers as psychological pain. Your mind craves complexity, pattern recognition, and meaningful analysis. When forced to focus on weather updates and weekend plans, it experiences what researchers call intellectual understimulation syndrome, a state where your cognitive abilities atrophy from lack of proper engagement. Think about the last time someone tried to discuss something meaningful with you versus the last time someone made small talk about their commute. Your energy levels during these interactions were probably drastically different. The meaningful conversation likely energized you despite its intensity, while the small talk left you feeling hollow and restless. This isn't coincidence. Your brain literally feeds on depth and starves on superficiality. The psychological pain of pretending to care about topics that feel meaningless to your complex inner world is real and measurable. When you're forced to engage with content that doesn't challenge your cognitive functions, your brain releases stress hormones similar to those produced during physical discomfort. You're not being dramatic when shallow interactions feel painful. They actually are painful to your nervous system. Your mind's strategic filtering system eliminates people who can't engage at the required depth, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Just like your body rejects food that lacks nutritional value, your psyche rejects relationships that lack intellectual and emotional substance. This filtering happens automatically because your brain has learned to recognize the difference between connections that sustain you and connections that deplete you. Why you'd rather have one deep friendship than 20 shallow ones becomes clear when you understand that relationship quality directly impacts your cognitive functioning. A single conversation with someone who can match your intellectual depth provides more psychological nourishment than months of surface-level socializing. Your brain calculates this ratio and consistently chooses quality over quantity. The loneliness comes from living in a world where most people are satisfied with surface-level connection, while you require depth to feel truly connected. It's like being hungry in a room full of people eating cotton candy. They're satisfied with the sweetness, but you need actual nutrition. Their contentment with superficiality doesn't make your need for depth invalid or excessive. Strategic isolation protects you from the depression that comes from chronic intellectual understimulation. When you consistently engage below your cognitive capacity, you develop what psychologists term learned helplessness, a state where you begin to believe that meaningful connection isn't possible. By withdrawing from intellectually barren environments, you preserve your belief that depth exists and maintain your capacity to recognize it when it appears. Your depth requirement isn't a character flaw or impossibly high standard. It's your brain's way of ensuring it receives the intellectual and emotional nutrition necessary for optimal functioning. Accepting relationships that don't meet this requirement isn't compromise. It's self-harm disguised as social accommodation. The misunderstanding defense matrix. Why explaining yourself is pointless. Your personality traits get consistently misinterpreted by people operating on different cognitive frequencies, and the pattern is so predictable, it's almost algorithmic. Your need for alone time gets labeled as coldness when you're actually recharging your complex processing systems. Your intellectual intensity gets seen as judgment when you're simply engaging at your natural depth. Your authenticity gets viewed as harshness when you're being vulnerable and real. Every single strength that makes you valuable as an INFJ gets flipped into a negative in other people's interpretations. Your high standards become perfectionism. Your pattern recognition becomes overthinking. Your emotional depth becomes drama. Your strategic thinking becomes manipulation. It's like speaking a foreign language where every word you say gets translated incorrectly by people who don't understand the grammar. The exhaustion of constantly defending your natural way of being to people who will never understand it becomes soul-crushing over time. You find yourself explaining that you're not cold, just introverted, that you're not judgmental, just observant, that you're not harsh, just honest. But these explanations never land, because the people misreading you are interpreting your behavior through their own cognitive framework, which operates completely differently from yours. Your brain's protective response develops over years of failed communication attempts. Stop explaining yourself and accept that you'll be misunderstood. This isn't giving up, it's strategic energy conservation. Your nervous system learns that defending your intentions to people who fundamentally misread them is like trying to teach calculus to someone who refuses to learn basic math. Technically possible, but practically pointless. Why trying to make yourself more palatable to others feels like psychological self-harm becomes clear when you realize that changing your natural expression to avoid misunderstanding requires you to suppress your authentic cognitive functions. When you dial down your intensity to seem less intimidating, you're literally forcing your brain to operate below capacity. When you fake enthusiasm for shallow topics to seem more approachable, you're betraying your need for meaningful engagement. The strategic decision to be alone rather than be around people who fundamentally misread your intentions becomes an act of self-respect. You're refusing to diminish yourself for others' comfort. You're choosing authenticity over acceptance, which is actually the healthier choice, even though it feels isolating. This creates a peculiar form of loneliness, where you're not just alone, you're misunderstood, even when people are trying to understand you. Your coworkers think you're standoffish when you're being professional. Your family thinks you're moody when you're processing emotions deeply. Your friends think you're critical when you're trying to help them see blind spots. Isolation becomes a form of self-respect, refusing to constantly explain and defend your natural way of being to people who will interpret it through their own limited framework anyway. Your brain calculates that solitude, where you can be authentically yourself, is psychologically healthier than social connection that requires you to constantly justify your existence. The misunderstanding isn't malicious, but it's consistent enough to become predictable. People operating at different cognitive frequencies literally cannot perceive your intentions accurately, which means no amount of explanation will bridge that gap. Your choice to stop trying isn't antisocial behavior. It's accepting the reality that some communication barriers can't be overcome through effort alone. Your isolation isn't a character flaw. It's your brain protecting its complex operating system from environments that would compromise its functionality. Society's one-size-fits-all approach to relationships doesn't work for minds that operate at your cognitive level and require depth, authenticity, and intellectual stimulation to thrive. The path forward isn't learning to accept shallow connections or dimming your natural intensity. It's stopping the exhausting cycle of apologizing for your depth and starting the strategic process of seeking people who can match your frequency. Your loneliness is temporary, but compromising your authentic self for shallow connection creates permanent psychological damage that's far worse than solitude. Find your people, or stay strategically alone until you do. If you want to continue the journey to understanding yourself, or an INFJ in your life, click either of the following videos, where we continue to unlock the secrets of the INFJ personality type.